the Right to Reason podcast. I am your host, Robert Stanley. Is consciousness an emergent property of the material world, or is the material world an emergent property of consciousness? Today, we are investigating reality by engaging with idealism.
The difference between solipsism and subjective idealism is contained in the famous double limerick. There was a young man who said, God, I find it exceedingly odd that a tree as a tree simply ceases to be when there's no one around in the quad. And the reply, young man, your astonishment's odd. I'm always around in the quad, so the tree as a tree never ceases to be, since observed by yours faithfully, God.
It's the Right to Reason podcast.
Descartes worried that the whole damn thing might be a dream state. He's not sure. He frets. And Berkeley, of course, declares the whole notion of an independently subsisting material world, a mind-independent material world, as simply impossible. How many of you agree with Berkeley on that? I knew it. Not one. All right, let's do it then, just for a couple of minutes. So you think that there is a mind-independent physical reality, a material reality. You know, something that makes a sound when you hit it, has an odor, is visible, is yellow, is square. You think that if you were to strip what you regard as physical reality of all, in principle, sensible properties, there'd be something left over. Well, what might that be? That is something to which there is no attending sense or mind, something beheld by no consciousness anywhere. And nonetheless, you're prepared with a kind of epistemic fundamentalism to say, notwithstanding to the contrary, that no mind in the imaginable cosmos apprehends any aspect of this entity, I declare without more, nonetheless it exists. Oh, stop it. Oh, you should be ashamed of yourself.
And in my mind, in my head, this is where we all came from. The dreams we have, the love we share, this is what we're waiting for.
This episode of the Right to Reason podcast is brought to you by our patrons and contributors like me. We have all recognized the value of the unrestrained marketplace of ideas and have decided to make a difference. You can make a difference too. Contribute at patreon.com/right and learn more about your right to reason at therighttoreason.com. Your activism is appreciated.
And today we were talking to Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy. I love your YouTube channel, man. Like, even as an atheist, it's well thought out. Is that a fair way to put it? Like, I can tell that you put a lot of research and study into your YouTube channel.
Well, yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. I like hearing that. So yeah, I do try to put a lot of research into it. I have a video coming out in March that I've been researching for probably about 2 years now.
What's that one going to be about?
That title of that video is called The Case for Ancient Monotheism.
What? See,
That's right.
We already disagree. So I'm guessing just from that title, you don't think that early Judaism and Mesopotamian religious time period that
I think the most Mesopotamian religions were polytheistic. I actually just uploaded a video this week called Israel's Revolutionary Monotheism, where I argued that there's a lot of anomalies in the biblical text that don't fit with an evolutionary model, and they fit far more with a revolutionary model. Mm-hmm. But the video itself will not be arguing that ancient Babylonians or the Assyrians or the Canaanites or the Egyptians were monotheistic. I believe those were polytheistic cultures. So it's going to have a little different in terms of research and the direction I'm going with that.
But don't you think the Jews started out polytheistic and it kind of transformed over time?
Well, technically, yeah. I mean, because they say in Joshua 24 that, when, your father Abraham, worshipped other gods on the other side of the Euphrates River, when you were in Egypt, you were worshiping other gods. Now put them off. So technically, yeah, they did. There was a lot of polytheism.
It changed things, at least. It changed the world toward a monotheistic structure.
Yeah, and I guess I could refer people to the two videos on my channel, Polytheism in the Bible, and then Israel's Revolutionary Monotheism. And then, of course, the case for ancient monotheism will be out soon, and that'll be the third part of this series.
It's kind of cool that we can already find some point of agreement. That's what I was really hoping for today. I wanted to talk to you about consciousness, where you see it coming from. I kind of lean more toward the idea that it has emerged from evolution and emerged from the universe. But I would suspect that you probably see it existing even before the universe, because it would have existed in a form of a deity or something like that, right?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you picked an easy topic, because everyone knows consciousness is just an easy topic to talk about. But no, I love this topic. I find it fascinating. And yeah, I am definitely an idealist. And so my idea is that consciousness is irreducible. It can't be reduced to information, to some sort of physical component. But I will also note that I don't see this as a religious objection, to be honest, because there's a lot of Christian theologians that are physicalists in terms of understanding human consciousness. So when they study biblical texts, I think the Bible actually is compatible with a physicalist outlook in terms of human consciousness. But nonetheless, I would agree that consciousness did exist before humans were around.
But do you believe like the laws of logic always existed as well, and certain maybe rules of physics, somewhat defined by God?
Well, I mean, let's define what we mean by those. I'm not a transcendental argument advocate. The presuppositionalists always use you need logic points to God. I agree that logic is descriptive. It's basically it's basically a description of the way reality is. So as long as reality has been there, logic has been there. And of course, I think there's never been a philosophical nothing. So yeah, I would say the laws of logic have always existed. In terms of physics, I would say they're a description of the way the physical universe acts. So as long as the physical universe has been there, physics has been there.
Okay, that makes sense. When you say it's irreducible, I like to think of consciousness on a sliding scale. So obviously we feel pretty confident that we're conscious, right? And that we have a very high level of consciousness compared to a horse, for example, or an ant, let's say. Like an ant is aware of three-dimensional space. So that's a big one. That's a very big one, because then you can move within it. It's aware of time to some extent, probably doesn't have an understanding of past and future and anything that we would claim it to be, like, that fourth dimension. But it is aware that it has to do things in a certain series of events to meet its goals, right? It's aware of social structures in a very simple way, because it's part of a community. They have their roles and their jobs, but that's probably about it, right? And we might even go to all the way down as we're sliding left on that scale to less consciousness, where we started with us and a horse, ant, and we move farther left to a tree.
Well, I think we agree, but I don't think we would define things the same way. So I would not agree that consciousness is like a sliding scale, because what I mean by consciousness, I just mean a self-aware agent. I would agree there's a sliding scale in terms of intelligence. So an ant has a smaller, ability to. I mean, I don't know if brain would be the right word at that level, but let's just use like a dog, for example.
Sure.
A dog has a smaller brain, so they have less information to process. So they would not be able to be as intelligent as us. But I don't think they're less conscious than us. I think consciousness itself just means you're self-aware. But if there's less information to be self-aware of, you could perceive them as being less aware in that sense, but I don't think that consciousness can be reducible in that sense.
I have trouble with anything that's like a flip it on and off switch whenever we're talking about the brain. Well, that might even be a better place to start. Do you believe consciousness is a result of our brain?
No, I do not. As an idealist, I think it's actually the opposite.
Explain that, please.
Okay, so a materialist would say that basically all there is matter. Mm-hmm. A substance dualist says, well, no, there's two substances. There's mind and matter. An idealist like myself says all that there is mind. And so the brain, the physical body, is information that's contingent upon mind. And a brain is how consciousness is limited to within a physical environment or within space-time. It's basically a good way to describe it is using the language that Donald Hoffman, cognitive scientist, has used, that it's like the user interface symbol of a conscious agent acting in a physical world.
And just to expand on that, if anybody's not familiar with the user interface symbol, imagine your computer screen, and there's a folder on your screen. You can click that folder, you can move it around, you can open it, you can look at files inside the folder, you can even take that folder and put it in the trash. But that folder doesn't really exist. It's just a way for you to see the things that are going. What's really happening is just literally electricity's firing, in a 1 and 0 pattern. And it's just making that folder visible to you so you can interact with the computer. We all understand that. But what Mike here is saying, that in some way that's what our brain is doing. Our brain is Windows 95 or something like that, right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, that's on the idealist view, yeah. And so that's basically the idea. Another way to put it is the brain and the nervous system is what a third-person experience of a conscious agent would look like. If a conscious agent, you or I, is acting in a physical environment, well, we have to look like something. And basically, that's how we are represented.
So how do you explain someone that is in a coma or when we're sleeping?
Oh, good. That's a good question. Mm-hmm. So think about this. Have you ever gone through the day and don't remember anything from last night, but then something triggers your memory and you remember a dream you had last night? Sure. So you weren't actually unconscious during the night. You actually had a dream. You just didn't remember it until a certain point of the time. It's a common idea that sleep or anesthesia sort of like turns off consciousness. But in fact, in 2011, there was a study called Consciousness Lost and Found: Subjective Experiences in an Unresponsive State. And they used anesthesia where they thought they were turning off consciousness, but a lot of people reported lucid conscious experiences and whatnot. So in terms of sleep or whatnot, it's just a way to give the brain rest because it's still something within a physical environment. It needs rest, but that doesn't mean consciousness necessarily disappears. What does seem to go away is the ability to form lasting memories within the physical space-time environment.
If I tell you I can go in your brain and affect your consciousness, your state of consciousness, and I can do that by making physical changes to your brain, you would simply say, yeah, that's the same as you can damage my computer, and that doesn't allow me to use the interface as well.
Well, sure. I mean, let's think of an analogy. People are now playing with these goggles they put on to play video games now. The 3D environment you can move around in. What are those goggles called?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, let's say I took a hammer and I damaged the screen by putting a couple cracks in it. And then you could still put on the goggles and sort of see, but it wouldn't be as clear and as vivid. All I damaged was the conscious agents, a pathway per se, or the ability to interact within the physical environment. So, I mean, there's a philosopher named Keith Ward. Keith Ward is an idealist like myself, and he uses a great analogy in terms of what this means. He says, we can thus say that minds read or interpret the configurations of neurons, which store information that the brain has received from its environment. Configurations and interpretations can go wrong, and if the physical basis is blocked or damaged, they will go wrong. It is not at all surprising that brain damage will cause predictable mental defects, or that particular mental processes are often found to be localized in specific regions of the brain.
Fair enough. I can agree with you to the extent that I don't think reality as we see it is the real true reality, right? So.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, there's actually a recent paper written by two neuroscience, and they're actually a limited materialist, surprisingly, but they were talking about space and time in the brain, and they were arguing that the space we experience and the rate of time we experience are emergent properties of the brain. And I read it and I kind of chuckled. I'm like, this basically is correlating with the idealistic interpretation.
My problem here is if you're going to say, if you're going to get this far with the concept of consciousness, wouldn't you have to have already accepted the illusion of free will and be more of a determinist?
How so? I'm confused how that would follow.
Whenever I'm trying to say, okay, this reality isn't really real, that concept is a result of accepting determinism for me. So it's weird to me that you would be at this point, once again, kind of like at the sliding scale, right? The argument that you're making is farther toward truth, and you're at let's say a 9 right now. You and I are both at a 9, right? For me to get to 9, I had to pass determinism right around 6 or 7. And the fact that you're here and you believe in free will, and you still believe in God, it seems bizarre to me because I don't know, for me, it just seems like these things have to happen in a certain order, right? So I don't understand if this reality isn't real and we're understanding reality in a particular way from a physical brain, and consciousness is actually existing deep within, I'm guessing, some kind of spiritual sense for you, right?
I guess you could say like that in a very colloquial sense.
Okay, yeah. It's coming from your spirit, colloquially speaking. Then that spirit is simply observing what's happening in physical reality. And that's why I would think like you wouldn't necessarily have a free will concept in there.
Well, I don't know if that follows, because how reality actually is, or what reality actually is, I don't think necessarily proves the will of the conscious agent is determined. By free will, we were just talking about the ability for a conscious agent to determine its path within a certain environment given various influences. So I note to people that I'm an objective idealist. I'm not a subjective idealist like Bishop Berkeley was. When I talk about idealism, I say that there really is a mental reality beyond the subject that we are all sharing in and experiencing and discovering. So we really can know true facts about the external world, so to speak. It's not all this model we've sort of put together from the subject. So I say all that to get back to the point of free will, that I would say that there really is free will agents experiencing some sort of external reality beyond themselves that they're allowed to discover and make choices in. I don't see that as necessarily affecting the free will of the agent itself.
Okay, but I'm sure you've heard about the experiments where they can have subjects try to, I think it was like push a button, but they could see that their brain made the decision to push the button before they actually did. You remember hearing about that?
Oh, the Libet experiments. Yep, I know all about those.
That's not convincing to you?
Well, no, because there has been other studies after that. So there was one in 2010 called Brain Preparation Before a Voluntary Action, Evidence Against Unconscious Movement Initiation. There was one in 2008, Analysis of a Choice Reaction Task Yields Interpretation of Libet Experiments. 2014, Brain Signals Do Not Demonstrate Unconscious Decision-Making, Interpretation Based on Graded Consciousness Awareness.
Were you expecting this convo to go this way? You're so ready.
No, actually. So I just debated Matt Dillahunty last month, and so I'm just using all my notes I had prepared for that.
Fantastic. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm loving it, man.
These later studies demonstrated that this readiness potential that was observed in the Libet experiments was not actually the conscious building of decision-making. Some of these studies actually observed the readiness potential while a subject was staring at a blank screen, and then they immediately flashed on the choice they had to make. So what we saw was a correlation in Libet experiments, and a lot of researchers went, well, this is the conscious agent building to make a decision. But actually, later experiments observed the exact same readiness potential, and it did not actually correlate with the conscious decision-making. So this has been called into question. Unfortunately, I still see people like Sam Harris or some of his followers citing these studies as if they demonstrate that the brain is creating the conscious decision-making. But in fact, the later studies that have not been highlighted enough have actually put this interpretation into huge doubt.
Yeah, I did have trouble with the fact that I didn't see a lot of other studies replicating that conclusion.
No, that's true. Yeah, you're right about that.
Yeah, so every time I look over, I kind of have a little bit of skepticism playing along. I like it because it offers me some real scientific proof of something that I feel is likely. You know what I mean? So whenever that might just be a bias on my end, where I look at that and say, okay, that confirms everything that I currently think about reality. So I'm really attaching myself to this.
Well, I think that's very honest of you, but you're right. We all have our own biases we need to work past, and that's why I think conversations like this are so good for me and for everyone. Is that we're able to talk about this from different perspectives and try to help each other with that.
Do you ever feel like you struggle with that bias to some extent whenever it comes
Absolutely.
to...
So I remind people I'm a theistic evolutionist. I was a young earth creationist for a time period of my life, right after when I became a Christian. And I went on MySpace, so that tells you how long ago it was, to try to debate atheists on evolution. And quite frankly, that was hard for me because they were right about the evidence for evolution, and it took a while for me to get past my biases to just sort of accept the evidence there.
What was our spirit doing before we evolved into Homo sapiens?
Well, let's define what we mean by these things. Spirit is a very colloquial word that's sort of thrown around. It can mean a number of things. Like I could say you got team spirit. It doesn't mean the same thing. So I want to differentiate between two things. Let's define them: the mind and the soul. Now, by mind, I mean the conscious, self-aware agent. By soul, I mean your personality, your thoughts, your emotions, your dreams, your goals, the collection of the information about you. Now, your soul evolves over time. Your soul is going to be different tomorrow. Your soul is different now than it was 10 years ago. Souls evolve and build over time. If you read certain theologians, they'll say that this life is a soul-building theodicy. We're meant to build our souls up in that sense. So I would say that you as a soul didn't exist until birth, even though that there was some sort of consciousness prior to that. And that what happens is at conception, it's the localization of consciousness to begin the process of building a new soul in that sense. So under an idealist interpretation, you're a unique soul, even though we all are sort of the part of the same conscious reality that we're a part of.
Did this soul exist before you were born?
I don't think so, no. I would say the soul, your soul, my soul, is something that comes into existence when a new person comes into existence. So
Why would it do that?
you know, your soul changes over time.
I don't understand why that would happen, though. Like at
what do
the
you mean?
moment well, I don't want to make it about abortion or anything, but you believe like we start to exist at conception at least, or a little bit after that maybe, or what have you, but really early on, I'm assuming, right?
Right.
So why would a soul be created in that moment when there's only physical things occurring?
Well, I mean, let's define what we mean by a soul. I mean, as I said again, it's like the information about you. Now, information is not like an ontological thing. We have to remember that, you know, information basically is going back to C. Shannon's work on mathematical theory of communication. He defines information as basically the properties of a system associated with the system's possible configurations, not an entity or an ontological class unto itself. So if materialism is true, information just refers to different material arrangements. And I think you would agree that if materialism is true, the soul, as I defined it, is just material arrangements in the brain that makes this information about you, your personality, your thoughts, dreams, etc.
If you're saying since everything is matter, then the soul must be matter as well, then I might be able to kind of lean toward that direction somewhat, but I don't see any reason to believe in a soul at all, obviously. So,
But I mean, you agree you have a personality, right?
yes.
That's all I'm defining as a soul. You know, you're just your personality plus your thoughts and, you know, your goals, dreams, emotions, everything about you that we could call mental in a sense.
I don't think
If
you
materialism is true, that's all it is.
I think you're attaching some supernatural part to that personality. Is that?
Well, it would be if I defined a soul as some sort of supernatural substance that sort of interacts with matter. But again, I'm just defining it in terms of how a theologian would define a soul-building theodicy. Now, I do get where you're coming from, because soul is readily attached to that supernatural explanation. So maybe for the purposes of this conversation, we just get rid of the word altogether. I kind of wish we would, honestly, because I think the word is thrown around too much to mean different things.
The word
So
soul or
we
the
could
word
just
supernatural?
soul. I have over the years I've come to sort of just not like that word as much because it's used to mean so many different things. So we could maybe just refer to it as personality.
I would love to, because, and I appreciate you saying, let's just do this so we can keep going, you know, because we have to get over this hurdle. And I appreciate that, but I worry that personality is going to be that little folder on my screen again. But if I open it, it's a whole bunch of files about going to heaven or hell, or, you know, all this
Really?
other, you know, yeah. Am I, is that kind of a straw man? Is that not fair?
I don't know. I guess we're just not on the same page in terms of what we mean by definitions in terms of this. I mean, this is why I wanted to define soul, because I'm very much of the idea that we don't have to refer to some sort of, you know, otherworldly substance, because I'm just defining it as what makes you you.
That's not all you mean. Like, you think your soul is eternal, yes?
No, because I think it comes into existence. I think the soul can kind of go on after death, yeah.
Fair enough. It's going to exist forever. And then it's going to be able to leave this body and have a new body attached to it, right?
True, yeah. In fact, I have a video on explaining how that would actually happen.
And it's also going to be able to exist in heaven or hell in the future.
Yeah. I have a video explaining how that would actually occur.
Sure.
So
I remember that hell one. It was really good.
Well, I mean, I'm open to the idea of annihilationism, so I'm not totally for, you know, an eternal hell in that sense. I'm more of an eventual annihilationist, I think.
Yeah.
But that's another topic altogether.
Sure.
But so a lot of research has been looking into this idea of quantum mind theory, the idea the brain is like a quantum computer. And we're actually finding a significant amount of evidence now that could correlate to that idea. And I can go over some studies if you want to. But if the brain is quantum computing, some researchers have theorized that upon death, the quantum information of the brain would still stay together via entanglement, yet become disconnected from the brain. So it could still, in a sense, go on. And so that would be how the soul itself would continue to exist after death.
I did not understand that at all. How does the quantum realm help explain your consciousness? I would assume remaining.
Well,
in
I think
existence.
the quantum realm explains the soul, that the information contingent on the mind.
I just don't. I don't follow at all.
Yeah, no worries. We can try to break it down a little bit easier.
Please.
So again, if we're going,
I don't know. I get a weird vibe, man. You know how I was saying,
So-
like with that test where they were testing that you don't have free will, and I was saying,
right?
like I while I'm watching it, you know, I like it, but I kind of had this weird skeptic feeling the whole time, you know, or while I was reading about it. The same vibe I'm getting right now.
Well, that's good.
Like,
Honestly, I think that's really
So-
good that you're
well,
skeptical. I don't want you to just take my word for it. I want you to go out and research this stuff and
it sounds
keep checking at it.
very Deepak-esque. Anytime I hear
You sure?
somebody tried to,
But
and it's not just with
let
the
me quote-
Christians. Like atheists will do the same thing with
Well,
consciousness.
let me quote a physicist named Max Tegmark. He says, "It's very important for physicists not to dismiss ideas just because they're weird. Because if we did, we would have dismissed all sorts of other things like atoms and black holes and all sorts of marvelous things." So yes,
Sure.
this does seem weird to the average person, I'm sure. But let's try to, what I encourage people is, let's follow the evidence. If the evidence actually indicated that Deepak Chopra was right, you know, he was actually true, we would want to be on his side because we want to be on the side of truth,
Yeah.
not on the side of what seems mundane to us.
Fair enough. It just
Yeah.
you don't think.
And just
that
to be
this
clear,
is the-
I disagree with Deepak Chopra
Of
on
course,
a number of
yeah.
things. I'm relying on what the physicists and the neuroscientists are saying here,
Absolutely.
but there's a lot of things he gets wrong.
I'm sure. Yeah, I wouldn't think that you would agree with him, but you don't think that, like what we were talking about with bias earlier, that even though you feel very confident that you're following the truth, that you're just following scientific facts, that it's kind of convenient that the science that you're following is the same as, you know, your religious beliefs. You know what I mean? Like I get you changed from being a creationist, or at least, you know, the fundamentalist version of creationism, to evolution, and that's awesome. But you don't think that maybe you're kind of doing this in a different way right now, like you're
Well, you're right. It very well could be the case. Now, I also was originally a substance dualist, and now I'm an idealist, so I did change my views on this as well. But this is why I have these conversations, because I want to be challenged
Mhm.
by someone else with more data. And the only way, you know, I can change my views is we need to submit our worldviews to political discourse. So what I do when I get in these conversations, like I just debated Matt Dillahunty, is here is my case, here's the evidence I use to support it. Give me a better explanation. Let me give you an example. Young Earth creationists always try to say, well, the rock layers prove Noah's flood. And the atheist or the theistic evolutionist comes along and goes, no, rock layers are better explained by being laid down by hundreds of millions of years of different sediment. Here's the evidence. This is why this model better fits the data. So likewise, when I'm presenting this evidence for irreducible consciousness, I'm presenting evidence in a model, and I'm saying, can you give me a better model that would better explain this data, that would show consciousness is emergent from the brain?
okay. So I stopped you in your conversation to say, hey, come on, I'm getting a weird vibe here. Don't you think maybe this is a little weird for you too? And I interrupted your whole explanation of the quantum, or your quantum explanation for the soul.
I mean, that's fair, and I'm glad you did, because I thought that was some good points we should hit on. But getting back to the main topic, I mean, quantum biology is now a thing. It was presented at the World Science Fair a couple of years ago that we are finding quantum processes within biological structures, like within photosynthesis, or DNA we now know is held together by quantum entanglement. In fact, Duke researchers have argued that quantum jitters are probably taking place within DNA. So we're finding a lot more, plenty of evidence that quantum processes are actually happening within biological processes. And so a lot of researchers have been looking to the brain as saying, well, maybe there's some evidence that there's quantum processes happening in the brain. And the brain is not just chemically computing. It could be quantum computing. And so I've highlighted some studies recently on this. There's some very interesting research coming out supporting it. That's one of the reasons I've been kind of moving in this direction, is I think the evidence is kind of fitting to it.
You think that the soul is a form of energy then?
No, that gets complicated. If it was energy, I think I would probably be a physicalist. You see, the quantum, when we're talking about quantum mechanics, I don't know if energy is really the best word to describe it, because energy is something that happens within space-time, within the universe. But even physicist Sean Carroll, who's an atheist, says, to quote, space is obviously not fundamental. Space is something, when you go from classical mechanics to quantum mechanics, space more or less disappears. And so other physicists like Hermann Verlaine have also been pointing out that a lot of what we see in physical world is sort of emergent from this underlying quantum realm. Professor Gates is another example of James Gates, who was interviewed by Neil deGrasse Tyson, has been pointing to some other indicators as well. So I wouldn't say energy in that sense. It just seems too material to get what I'm getting at.
So what is it?
Well, I would say basically it is information. And if idealism is true, information refers to phenomenal states that can be qualitatively discerned from one another. So an example would be qualia, sensations. So think of like a good analogy would be like a video game. Ultimately, the entire world you experience in a video game is just emergent from underlying code.
Mm-hmm.
So analogous, I would say that our world is sort of similar to that in that the phenomenal states we experience, the qualia, the sounds, mental phenomena, would all be sort of emergent from this underlying quantum code, so to speak.
And I get that that could explain how our brain would be the video game cartridge, right? But that doesn't mean that there is more to the video game. You know what I mean? Like that game is just physical. And the only reason that we're able to see anything is we're applying electricity to matter that we have adjusted in such a way that it makes it interactive, right? But there's no essence of Double Dragon. Whenever I'm playing Double Dragon on, what was it? Was it Super NES? Remember those days?
I have no clue.
What would you start
I remember Battletoads and Double Dragon, but not...
Yeah. I started with Atari, like Qbert. I go that far back. I had the little joystick.
Wow.
You sound like a Sega kid to me.
I was regular Nintendo.
Oh, okay, cool. Anyway, sorry. But there's no essence of Double Dragon, right? So I don't know why there needs to be, in this analogy, why that would explain like the soul more or less. Like that would be more explaining the brain. But you're saying there's information that is existing at a quantum level that is interacting with our brain. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, that's the essence of quantum mind theory, is that, there is some sort of quantum information. So in terms of that, it's very mathematical in terms of what it's getting at. Now, I want to make sure we're on the same page here, because I think we're kind of going around with the video game analogy. Go back to that for a second, because you said there's really no essence to the video game. And true, it's all just code. And that's my basic point, though, is that what we're seeing or experiencing in the video game is just sort of this emergent code from some sort of underlying more reality, in this sense, physical. The video game itself is just a different arrangement within like a computer. But that video game world is emergent. That's what I'm going for in the analogy. It's not itself a real ontological substance. There's no atoms bouncing around together in Double Dragon, even though it appears there are. We would call them pixels on the screen. So in a sense, it's an emergent reality. And all I'm saying is that our actual physical reality is sort of like that, in that it's emergent from underlying code. As physicist Hermann Verlaine said, he said at the World Science Fair, he said in the future, at least with this development, we'll start with information, and space-time, we'll forget about what space-time is, but the space-time will be emergent. It'll just come out of ones and zeros, end quote.
I'm always surprised. Well, I shouldn't say surprised. I roll my eyes when I hear the word quantum, and I feel like whatever the new popular science thing out there is, that religious folk will like tend to jump at it, like almost like a God of the Gaps kind of thing, where they'll say, oh, yeah, this one right here, that explains my faith. And we say, well, we don't really know much about it. And it's almost like you guys are like, good, because as long as it's elusive, as long as it's kind of a misunderstanding, then I feel like I can insert God there. You know what I mean? That's the vibe I get when I hear you saying this. Well, I mean, it's fascinating. Maybe that's my own little, I don't even want to say skepticism. That's more cynical, right? I'm more just making a personal judgment about you.
That's fine. That way, but I would challenge you on two things there. I don't think it's first of all, I would say actually quantum mechanics is extremely precise. I remember there was a French physicist named Julien Bobroff who pointed out that it is the most precise theory we have ever developed. We can repeat experiments and get accuracy up to like 10 decimal places. It's not something that is up for question in terms of the science of it. It's a very accurate, very precise scientific theory that we don't really even have to question that much in terms of its results. But in terms of inserting God to it, I mean, up to this point in the conversation, we've not really even talked about God. So I've not really even explained how this would get us to a theistic worldview.
But that's what this is, right? I mean,
How?
this isn't just you looking at the world and saying, whatever it is, I'll just accept it. Like, there's a part of you, and correct me if I'm painting you with the wrong brush, man, because I really don't mean to, but I think we both know that there's a part of you that wants to defend your theism to some extent. I mean, that's gotta be ever present in your mind. And I'm not saying that you're being biased. I'm saying that you are. What's a good word?
Well,
you have a favorite
I get what
flavor.
I get what you're saying.
Like I'm not biased about chocolate cake, right? I just don't want to eat German chocolate cake, right? I have a flavor that I prefer, and so whenever. Yeah, go ahead.
I get what you're saying. I mean, everyone is biased. Everyone wants to defend their worldview. I could say the same thing about you. You know, you're just you want to defend the atheistic worldview, and because that's the way humans are, we want to defend our worldviews. Again, it goes back to what I said earlier. The only way I could work towards correction is the same way I came to accept evolution, was submitting my worldview to public discourse and then fighting through that, testing it every way I possibly can. You're right. I'm biased. You're biased. Everyone's biased. Mm-hmm. But that's why we have to have these conversations to get past that bias. If you want to convince me I'm wrong, you got to actually go into the evidence with me and say, here's where you're misrepresenting quantum mechanics. Here's where we have actual evidence of neuroscience that consciousness emerges from the brain. Here's where, the evidence that here's a better model that explains all that data. So this is what I'm constantly doing with atheists, as well as young earth creationists, now that I am a theistic evolutionist.
I love that you're a theistic evolutionist. I wish there were more of you. The Christian movement's going to have to go that route eventually, for sure.
I'm going to make sure it does.
Yeah. Okay. I'm with you, and I appreciate what you said. Just, give me more data and I'll change my mind. I love that, man. I think where I'm struggling with you and getting on the same page with you, I'm lacking the understanding of the soul part. If we're going to talk about consciousness, it's almost like tying it to a soul ties it to something supernatural. And whenever you said, well, let's use personality, we wouldn't say my personality exists at a quantum level. We wouldn't say my personality is going to live forever, or my personality is going to recognize other personalities in this eternal God-worshipping state.
Well, I mean, I don't see how you could divorce yourself from your own personality. Now, I do agree there is a mind that has a personality. You are a mind that has a personality. I'm a mind that has a personality in that sense. But I don't see why it has to necessarily attach to something supernatural. And this is something I even said in my debate with Matt Dillahunty. I don't even know what supernatural technically means. Anytime someone tries to define it, it is always these exceptions and these rules, and it's just a bad term. I feel like
it really is. Yeah, I always wonder that too. How can we test for that? If you're gonna say it's not natural, then I have no way to investigate this thing because I only have natural methods to analyze anything around me. So.
Right, and that's why I just throw the terms all out and I say, let's just talk about the studies, let's talk about the evidence, let's talk about the worldviews, idealism versus materialism, and let's not even use the term supernatural because I don't know what that means.
So do you think God is then natural?
I don't know what that means.
Well, matter, like hard stuff.
I don't think God is matter because I don't think matter is its own substance as an idealist. I think matter is information in an idealistic worldview. So let's go with something David Hume put forward. David Hume did not agree with me on a lot of this stuff, but he does have an interesting point in something called bundle theory. And his idea in their bundle theory is you can't describe something without properties. So take a green apple. You could describe it by its color green, by its shape, the hardness, the sensation of taste. If you take away all the properties of the apple, what are you left with to describe? Mm-hmm. Well, nothing. Now, as an idealist, I hear that and go, yeah, that's the point. Matter is just these phenomenal states of information. It's qualia, it's taste, sensations, but that's all mental information. We don't have to posit another ontological substance we call matter beyond what we mentally experience. So as an idealist, I say the simplest explanation is that we're minds and we experience a mental reality.
Whenever you're taking away those states of the apple, the tastiness, the sweetness, the crunchy, those are ways that we're making attributions to the apple, right? That's not actually what the apple is. We're describing the apple in a way that we can then understand it. So crunchy, what the hell is crunchy, right? That's just us describing something that makes a certain effect inside our mouth when we're eating it.
No, yeah, I think I like where you're going though, but that's my point. Everything that we have to describe the apple is just our mental phenomena. So just invoking Occam's razor, why posit another substance beyond the mental phenomena.
Because the apple would still be crunchy even if humans didn't have teeth.
I disagree.
How?
Because a mental phenomena
You really
sort of
don't?
and this is something even
You really
Thomas the
disagree with
atheist,
that?
Thomas Nagel, agrees with in his book Mind and Cosmos. These mental sensations, taste, smell, they only exist when something interacts with a conscious agent. Take color. Color does not exist beyond a conscious agent because different wavelengths hit the retina of the eye, chemical reactions go back, and then within the brain hits the visual area, but then it goes to another part of the brain and color emerges somehow on the materialist worldview. Color is not something that is out there that we're just sort of finding. It only happens when a conscious agent interacts with it.
You mean that generally. You don't mean that specifically. We could say the same thing you just said and say whenever the retinas interact with it, right?
Well, no, because the retina is not producing color. Color is something that would happen within the mind or on a materialist worldview, the brain.
Right. Okay. So that's all I was asking was that you're not saying that it's necessarily consciousness interacting with it, the brain interacting with it would be the same point, right?
I'm not. Can you clarify what you mean by that? I'm not sure.
I'm with you that on the color point, and I like how you moved away from crunchiness to color because this is one that would probably be a better example. But I'm clarifying that you're not saying that everything is a result of consciousness. Like all of this would still exist even if no conscious minds existed, right?
Well, I would disagree that it would exist as it is right now. Like it wouldn't be the phenomenal thing that we're experiencing, like the color, the shape, or whatnot. The information would still be there. Just like take a video game cartridge. It's still there in terms of the code until you turn it on and then this phenomenal state comes on the screen.
Oh, yeah.
Without it being on the screen, it's still there in an information sense, but not in a phenomenal sense.
I feel like I'm trying to help because what I'm afraid you're saying is that we're creating our own reality with our consciousness. And I know that's not where you want to go.
True. In a sense, again, this is why I keep using the video game analogy, because when you turn on the video game, it's emergent. You don't get to create the construct of that world. You only get to experience it and move around in it. So yeah, in a sense, we don't get to create things. This is where Deepak Chopra goes wrong because he thinks we can sort of like cure a sickness with our brain or with our mind or whatnot. And we don't have that ability. We can only participate or experience the physical world, and we're bound to the rules of it. But it's still emergent in that there's a conscious agent interacting with this information construct.
The apple would still be a green apple, even if everyone was blind, right?
No, I don't think it would be. I think it would be a hard apple. It would be a crunchy apple. But what would be color in such a world? It wouldn't even exist.
The skin of the apple would still have the same response to the light that's bouncing off of it, right? It would still
it would still have that response, but what would actually be hitting it is wavelengths of the light. It wouldn't act, and then the apple absorbs all the other wavelengths and reflects one back at a retina of an eye, which then takes in that information, and then color pops up in the mind. But we wouldn't say green is there because there's no information, there's no emergent color if everyone is blind.
But it would still have the same color regardless. It just, we wouldn't know it. In the same sense of, you could say that gravity is passing by us right now, but we can't actually feel that gravity if it's from, let's say, the moon. But the moon is having gravitational pull on us, just like other things.
The gravitational pull is, it's a result of curvature of space. It's basically the physics, which is information itself. But I mean, I'm talking more about mental properties, not so much the physics of something.
In the same way, we can't really tell that the moon's pulling us toward it right now. We wouldn't be able to, because we don't have that sense. Now, if we had like a super gravity sense, right? Just like taste, smell, and gravity or something like that, or a special power that you can sense radiation or Wi-Fi signals, all those things could be very useful, but we just can't feel that. And that doesn't mean that it's not there in the same way that the apple is still green, even if we couldn't see it.
Well, what is green to you on your worldview? I know that's not easy to define. But.
No, it's not. But I agree with you that is a way that we are describing what we find to be a commonality with that color. I mean, my green might not be your green, but we certainly both know it's not blue and red, right? So we can find some objective truth about this from our experience, but it's also the result of physics, even if we don't have that experience.
What is physics, though?
That would just be the way that we describe the physical nature of the universe.
Right. It's essentially information. It's how we describe the physical world. And that's what I said in the beginning of this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
That's what physics is. But then it goes to information. It's like that old saying, you know, all biology reduces to chemistry, which reduces to physics, which reduces to mathematics, and mathematics is just information. But that's my point. All of this stuff of what we are experiencing that we call matter, the physical world, it reduces constantly to these information constructs. And all I'm saying as an idealist, that's all it is. Why posit that there's an actual substance there when we don't need to?
You know, at the start of this conversation, I was saying I want to talk about consciousness. And I don't know, we kind of have talked about it, but it seems more like we just talked about what is reality. Would that be a fair description of the conversation?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, but this is all, I mean, that's because it's really hard to talk about consciousness because it's very mysterious without trying to talk about reality and examples and whatnot. So yeah, I get where you're coming from.
In a way, it's like you kind of see them as the same thing. And that's kind of a beautiful...
As an idealist, yeah. I mean, I have to if I'm not going to be a consistent idealist.
It's a beautiful worldview, I'll be honest with you. I like hearing it. I like thinking about it. I still, even toward the end of this,
can I go over one study I did want to at least bring up?
Yeah, please.
So there was a study done in the 80s on rats. And they were given lithium. There was a control group, and there was two other study groups. One was given lithium-6 and lithium-7. Now, lithium-7 is actually used to actually mellow people out. It's actually a drug that people are given. So we know that it's used. However, it's not chemically different at all from lithium-6 because all that happens is there's one extra neutron added to the nucleus of the atom. So we wouldn't expect it to chemically affect the brain because chemicals are based on the amount of electrons that are present. However, in this study on rats, the study group that was given lithium-6, they actually had the exact opposite effect. They became what was the term helicopter rats. They were constantly looking over their young, checking on them. They displayed more panic personality traits, whereas the rats given lithium-7, they were more mellowed out. And so what some researchers have noted about this study is that the only thing that changes from lithium-6 to lithium-7 is the quantum vibration frequency. It doesn't change chemicals. Now, if the brain is quantum computing, that would make sense because quantum vibrations would change the way behavior or personalities actually act. So, going back to the whole conversation, that seems to tie in as evidence for my view that the brain is actually quantum computing if you can change something on a quantum level, but not chemically, and you can actually change the personality or behaviors of the organism. And
it just had one more electron, is that what you said?
No, not one more electron. That would change it chemically. One more neutron added to the nucleus.
Fascinating. And so, but the molecule itself is the same.
Molecule itself is basically the same. The only thing is one extra neutron is added to the nucleus.
Each atom in the molecule.
Mm-hmm.
Bizarre. I don't know. I have no response for that, man.
That's perfectly fine. I don't want to use that as like a gotcha moment.
No, not at all.
I want to get people thinking about this stuff, and I understand a lot of this comes across as weird, but really, science is weird. I mean, could you imagine trying to explain quantum tunneling or entanglement to someone in the 1800s? They'd look at you like you were a mystic. But that's the way science is constantly doing. It's constantly changing our worldviews, giving us new information about reality. And we shouldn't be afraid of that. We should be open to that. We should also be skeptical. You're absolutely right. Deepak Chopra says a lot of bad things. But we need to get this pull and tug kind of thing going on.
Well, I've enjoyed talking to you, Mike. I really have. I'm going to look into this a little more, man, because I have a lot of people pushing me that direction. Ever since I did a conversation on panpsychism, and then I started talking about, Donald Hoffman and all that kind of thing. And it's a lot of fun. It feels very reminiscent of right after I left Christianity. I got into Taoism a good bit. Really, started looking at Alan Watts and all the kind of Confucianism and all this stuff. And I loved it. And then I just got disappointed because I said, oh no, there's a special little part of faith that's required to keep going, and I can't keep going. And I still have a lot of benefit, from it. I still like to practice mindfulness. I still meditate occasionally. There's a lot of benefits, and I'm sure there's a lot of benefits to this worldview that you have. I just fear that at some point faith's going to have to be a factor, and I don't know that I can follow.
I just want to say I'm always happy to come back. I enjoy these conversations with you. You're not a crazy person. You're very good at listening and bring up some excellent points. So yeah, I'd be happy to come back anytime. In terms of faith, I mean, I would encourage people to check out a video I did called Is Faith Blind? And I think there's a little bit of faith in everything we have to believe, because you got to trust your cognitive faculties. You got to have faith in your own ability to reason. So in some sense, I think, we're never going to know absolutely 100% certain if something is true. I use this phrase often. We have to reason to the best explanation or find the best inference. And so in some sense, if we're defining faith as just, as something like loyalty or trust, yeah, I think there's faith in every worldview, and that's perfectly fine. I'm not afraid of that.
Everybody, if you want to hear more of this and many of the other topics that he referenced, go check out Inspiring Philosophy. Mr. Jones, thanks so much, man.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you to Michael. Thank you to Dave Blair at daveblairmusic.com. Thank you to our patrons. You can also support this broadcast at patreon.com/right and learn more at therighttoreason.com next week. We're debating free speech and cancel culture, featuring Annie with a Y and Brent Lee versus John and Seamus from the Free Thought Prophet. Between now and then, remember that you have the right to reason.